Thank you, Gene. Well, I didn't talk to Gene about the song, but I can tell you I had an email from Charles. He's with his family doing a family celebration in Montana. And he wrote and he said, "You sure you got everything taken care of?" And blah, blah, blah. And Barry's here to help you and all of this. So I wrote back, and guess what I said? About a thing. We got it covered. So I've got notes. I have a lot of information here. I want to make sure I've got it right. And I'm going to do this in sections, and then you're going to have a chance to ask me questions, okay? So we're going to talk about who we are, who is Ernest Holmes, what is CSL, and what we believe. So who are we? As we stated earlier, we are the Santa Fe Center for Spiritual Living. However, we are part of a larger organization called Centers for Spiritual Living, which is an outpicturing of a teaching by Ernest Holmes. And he was interested in spirituality, philosophy, a way of life, and metaphysics. He wasn't really interested in starting a church. He was a speaker. So here's some information about Ernest Holmes. He was born January 21st, 1897 in Maine, in Lincoln, Maine, which is about in the center of the state. He was the youngest of 9 children. At the age of 15, he left school and he moved to Boston, and he went to work in a store as a clerk, and he went to school at I want to make sure I get this straight, the Leland Holmes School. Leland Powers School of Expression was also known as the Leland Powers School of Elocution. And it was for actors and speakers, and he did that for 2 years. And then he moved to Venice, California, where he joined his brother Fenwick. All right. There, he took up a job with the city government, and Holmes and his brother, who was a congregational minister, his family was Baptist. The family he was raised in. So Baptist, Congregationalist, and the two of them studied the writings of Thomas Troward, Ralph Waldo Emerson, William Walker Atkinson, and Christian D. Larson. In 1916, after leading small private meetings throughout the city, he was invited to speak at the Metaphysical Library in Los Angeles. And that was successful, and he did repeat engagements. So now listen to this. In 1919, at the age of 32, he published his first book, The Creative Mind. And after almost a decade of touring, he committed to remain in the LA area to work on his magnus opum, The Science of Mind textbook, which was published in 1926 when he was 39 years old. His speaking, however, he would talk every Sunday morning in a theater at the Ambassador Hotel that sat 625 people. That didn't last very long. In November 1927, they moved to the 1,295-seat Ebell Theater. Then his lectures continued, moving to ever larger spaces, including the Biltmore Hotel and the Wiltern Theater, which seats more than 2,800 people. And that's what he did. He gave talks on a Sunday morning. Holmes incorporated the Institute of Religious Science and School of Philosophy And then later that year, he began publishing in 1927, The Science of Mind magazine. It has been in continuous publication for 98 years. In 1935, he reincorporated his organization as the Institute of Religious Science and Philosophy. You can see why I wrote down all of this information. It sort of sounds familiar as you go along. However, in 1954, there was a split. And there was a split around governance. And two groups formed at that time. One was called the United Church of Religious Science, or UCORS, and RSI, Religious Science International. And UCORS believed in sort of a top-down approach, and RSI believed in a bottom-up approach, sort of like federal government, state government. Sound familiar? I mean, who's got the power? And that really broke Ernest's heart. As I mentioned earlier, I got involved on the national scene in 2003, and one of the things that we talked about was why the split? What was this all about? And enough time had passed from 1954 that people really couldn't remember what the split was all about. And a decision was made both within the United Church of Religious Science and RSI to come back together again. And that happened in 2011. It was known as integration. But what happened along the way, the name changed yet again. And United became the United Centers for Spiritual Living, and RSI became International Centers for Spiritual Living. And that happened in 2008. And then 2011, we dropped the United and the International and simply became Centers for Spiritual Living. So that's the current iteration of who we are. So, what are your questions about that or observations? All right. Change is the stability of the universe. Well, looks like you wanted to say something. No? Okay.
James.
What?
What did she just say? Oh, change. Change. I'm sorry. We talked a lot about change, a lot of reiteration. Yeah, change, sorry, that's okay.
So next, what is CSL? And CSL has a vision, a purpose, and a mission. And the vision is to create a world that works for everybody. The purpose is to awaken humanity to its spiritual magnificence. And the mission is to provide spiritual tools for personal and global transformation. And you'll notice that each one of these is an action item: to create, to awaken, and to provide. So where do we stand in the world? And at this point, we have 786 ministers. They have to renew their license every year, and 42 of them are emeritus, or there are 42 new emeritus ministers. The whole movement is aging. There's no question about that. Okay, let's move on. In addition to ministers, next slide, we have just over 2,000 licensed practitioners all around the world. And we continue to license new practitioners, and they renew their license every other year. So that's why that number is a little bit smaller. Next. So the reason I have this slide up here is go down to the next to last one, 16 pulpits filled in 2024. We're one of the 16 when we brought Reverend Charles in. So that's how we fit onto that slide. The last one, please. So look at the big blue on the right-hand side, 223 centers all around the world. We have a presence in 30 countries, and the fastest growing regions are Central and South America and Africa. And we were known as a SoCal-centric organization. And one of the things that happened in the early part of this century is a decision was made to move the headquarters out of California. We moved it to Denver, and now we're selling the building in Denver, and we're 100% virtual. But 30 countries, and Barbara and I have had the good fortune of spending some time in the Ukraine. We were there for a week teaching at a Science of Mind conference. We taught a couple of times in Mexico at the Conference of the Americas, and that had to be in both cases, it had to be translated. Fortunately, in Mexico, it was a simultaneous translation, so we didn't have to stop. But in Ukraine, we would say something, and then we had to be silent, and somebody else would repeat in Russian what it was that we were saying. We've also been in Canada and many other places in the United States. So it's a worldwide organization.
When you're teaching, are you teaching about science of mind, or are you teaching the teachings of Holmes?
Both.
Okay.
But about 10 years ago, we got a call from a minister in California, not California, in Canada, on Vancouver Island. And she said, we're reading a book by Richard Rohr, who lives in Albuquerque, called Falling Upward. And we want to do a weekend retreat. And we want a couple to come in and do that.
Couple of elders.
Couple of elders. Good point. And it wasn't a Zoom call. What was the predecessor? The Skype. It was a Skype call. And I called, we were in our office, and Barbara was in the front, and I was in my office in the back, and I called her in. She sat on my knee, and we had a conversation, and this woman said, we're looking for elders and somebody who could talk about the aging process. And we said, okay. We hung up the phone, and I turned to Barbara, and I said, shit, the only thing I know about being old is that I'm 72. And 6 months later, we went and we did a Friday night talk. We did an all-day workshop on Saturday. We did the Sunday talk, and we did another workshop on Sunday evening. And that's what launched us into a program that we wrote called Creative Aging, Embracing Life with Passion, Purpose, and Possibility. And so a lot of what we taught was related to that.
The Science of Mind principle.
Right. Yeah. Thank you.
So at the present moment, Centers for Spiritual Living consists of 4 nonprofits. There's CSL, there's a camp in Camp Cedar Ridge in Oregon. There's the Library and Archives, which is housed at Unity Village in Kansas, and the Science of Mind Foundation, which is virtual. And I mentioned earlier that I'd served on the foundation. Susan Carter served along with Jim Patterson on the marketing committee. So Santa Fe has had a presence in the Science of Mind Foundation. So, questions? Yes, Terry.
Take it down into the call. The part about the religious science, that Bernardo did talk at one point about, we're not a religion, kind of science, believe in God or something, but the word religion in there, I know if I tell other people, with that, then they ask, is this like a cat or something like that?
What's the affiliation?
Yeah, word religion. And I know they took it out, right? Science of mind, so.
Yep, well, so the name was the United Church of Religious Science. And metaphysics is the study of life. And it's not a classic science approach. The science approach is you come up with a hypothesis and then you create experiments to validate whether that hypothesis is true or not. But in metaphysics, there's no way to do that. You can't use the scientific method. However, Ernest Holmes believed that there were scientific laws, just like there's gravity, there's the law of attraction. And as one example, there are many. And he used the scientific method to prove some of these metaphysical concepts. And part of it had to do with spirituality. And I think that's where the religious name came in. But he had no intentions of starting a church. And so part of the name change is that we used to get very confused with Scientology. And even my father, when he first learned that we had joined the Church of Religious Science, thought I was in Scientology. And he was 2,000 miles away in Rhode Island, Barrington, Rhode Island, just like Harrington. And he was a little upset. So that was part of the drive to get rid of that name. Any other questions? So what do we believe? How are we doing time-wise? Oh, we got plenty of time. Jim?
And the truth, you talk about teaching center. Can you share what that is? Teaching center.
Well,
Could you repeat the question for us?
yes, his question was that on the slide, I pointed out that we had over 200 communities, but there were also the other half. And the largest one of those was, thank you. All right, so look up here, 118 spiritual living circles. The spiritual living circles are groups of people who live nowhere near a center, and they're just half a dozen to a dozen people who get together and study the science of mind. Then 22 study groups, teaching chapters, and teaching centers. They're just variations. Usually they don't have a minister, they can have a practitioner in charge, and they get affiliated with Centers for Spiritual Living. And then there's a relatively new group called Focus Ministries. And basically there are more ministers than there are centers. There were over 700 ministers, only 200 centers. So some of those ministers take on a special project. Some might do music, some run animal care places. It's a variety of things. Does that answer your question, Jim? Okay. So what we believe. Holmes taught New Thought in a Christian context in his church. The primary teaching of New Thought is that physical form is created by universal mind. or God, which manifests or literally reflects the dominant belief system of all living persons. In his book, The Signs of Mind, Holmes describes this God force as follows. There is a universal mind, spirit, intelligence that is the origin of everything. It is first cause. It is God. This universal life and energy finds an outlet in and through all that is energized. I got ahead of myself. This universal life and energy finds an outlet in and through all that is and through everything that lives. Holmes argued that human beings have access to the power of this universal mind by directing their thoughts, in particular, their beliefs about the present or the future. He states, experience has taught us that the subjective tendency of this intelligent law of creative force may be consciously directed and definitively used. And he called that the greatest discovery of all time. In The Science of Mind, he explains how it's possible to direct this power by controlling one's thoughts. Let me go back to what I read about Viktor Frankl and making a choice and directing his thoughts. In other words, good events proceed from a belief in good, evil events proceed from evil thoughts. In The Science of Mind, Holmes emphasized the importance of only focusing on good. Never look at that which you do not wish to experience. No matter what the false condition may be, it must be refuted. The proper kind of denial is based upon the recognition that, in reality, there is no limitation. For mind can as easily make a planet as an acorn. The infinite knows no difference between $1 million and a penny. It only knows that it is. Holmes emphasized it was necessary to think one specific thought with complete certainty. If one is continually thinking different thoughts, the universal mind will not have a dominant belief that it can manifest or create in the physical world. You've heard Charles talk many times about planting seeds, right? You got to plant one seed. So from creative mind, so plastic is mind, so receptive that the slightest thought makes an impression upon it. People who think many kinds of thought must expect to receive a confused manifestation. If a gardener plants 1,000 kinds of seeds, he will get 1,000 kinds of plants. And it's the same in mind. You have to plant one thought and work on that continuously in order to get results. So here's a breakdown of our beliefs, sort of in a simplified, not in the flowery language of Ernest Holmes. God is universal spirit. Religious science views God not as a separate entity, but as the universal spirit or mind that permeates all of existence. Mind cure philosophy. A core tenet is that the human mind is an expression of the universal mind, and that positive thoughts and intentions can influence physical and mental well-being. Spiritual mind treatment is a form of affirmative prayer, a process of declaring spiritual truths to align with the desired outcome and creative positive change. Unity of life. Religious science emphasizes the interconnectedness of all living things and the sacredness of life. Personal responsibility. Individuals are believed to be responsible for their own experiences through their thoughts and actions. Rejection of dogma. Religious science encourages a personal, intuitive approach to spirituality rather than adherence to rigid doctrines or dogma. I got it, Barbara. Just giving me the time sign. Focus on positive living. The ultimate goal is to have a harmonious and fulfilling life, free from discord and strife, by aligning with the divine power within you, within each and every one of us. In an evolutionary view of spirituality, we embrace the idea of continuous revelation and spiritual growth with individuals and the movement itself evolving over time. So, what are your questions? So we've had an opportunity to talk a little bit about who we are, who is CSL, the history of Ernest Holmes and what he did and how he went about creating what has now become Centers for Spiritual Living, and also taking a look at what is it that we believe. And I just want to thank you for being here today, and thank you for this community. It has made a huge difference in our life. We joined the church originally for our kids who were 2 and 4 at the time, and it really has been a huge part of our life. And we love the Science of Mind, and we love this community. And thank you very much. Just to make sure that Charles wouldn't worry, he sent me 3 times the order of service. So